Hi, everyone. We're just going to get started in 1 minute, but please do move forward. There are lots of seats. It'll be nice to have more of a conversation if we're able to, as always, even though we are seated on a dais with microphones. All right, thanks very much, everyone. We'll get started. First, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this event on Hacking Climate Change, the Digital Future of Climate Leadership, Innovation, and Impact. I'm your moderator for this event. My name is David Way. I'm the Climate Change Director at BSR, or Business for Social Responsibility, and we're a global nonprofit that has worked for 25 years with large multinational companies on sustainability. And today, that very much includes a lot of work on climate change, on reducing emissions, and on building climate resilience. Our session today is going to have a typical and hopefully very contiguous, smooth flow. I'll make some introductions of our panelists, our very capable and esteemed panelists. There will be I'll provide some initial questions to them, and they'll answer them. I'm going to try and have the panel engage in discussion on certain themes that arise from those questions, and then we want to make sure that you, the audience, have the opportunity to ask questions of the panelists and to access their expertise and their insight. By way of context, I want to say that today, we are here at COP23 in the context of a Paris Agreement which sets out global goals for emissions reductions and for building climate resilience. And under that agreement, as I think you all know, almost all countries have put forward nationally determined contributions, or essentially country pledges to do so. And that being done, it is now time for implementation. It is time for actual emissions to be levered out of the atmosphere and actual resilience to be built in communities. This particular COP also has several other important themes at it. Those of you who are observing the main policy discussions, I think will know that one of the main policy outcomes will be the design of what is now being called the Talanoa Dialogue, which is a ministerial dialogue through 2018, which is intended to foresee the enhancement of these nationally determined contributions in 2020. And what this does is it highlights the importance of two things: the importance of implementing nationally determined contributions by on-the-ground actual implementation, and the importance of innovation to accomplish this implementation and to open the space for new ambition, because it is through innovation and through technology that indeed that space is created, that the potential enhancement in the future is imagined. You may also be aware that in 2018, the California governor, Governor Brown, has announced that he'll hold a Global Climate Action Summit in September, and that will be prior to COP24, which will foresee the completion of the set of technical rules under the Paris Agreement, many of which revolve around transparency. And so I think what's great about this panel is that these panelists act at the nexus of these particular themes that this COP is about. They act at the nexus of innovation, of ambition, policy, and transparency. And what they are involved with is the use of technology and the creative use, for example, of big data analytics to enable new ways, more ambitious ways, of reducing emissions and building climate resilience. And that is, of course, hacking climate change. So let me introduce them to you now. I'm trying to see who is where. To my immediate left is Victor Gancel. He manages the Low Carbon City Lab, Europe's a flagship program of Climate-KIC, which is Europe's largest public-private innovation partnership. It is aimed at unlocking climate finance for cities, and it provides training, project preparation, investment, and impact assessment tools and services. You'll see often in the climate world that people come from many different backgrounds. I myself am an international lawyer by training. Victor happens to come from the aerospace industry with an education in finance. And of course, if I'm wrong, people should actually come and tell me that I'm wrong if I've got it wrong. Over on the on the other side, at the far end of the podium, is Leonie Klaas. She works at Telefónica Next, which is an entrepreneurial spin-off of Telefónica Germany. Telefónica Germany is the largest mobile communications provider in Germany with 47 million lines. And she works on innovation, on big data, and the Internet of Things, and specifically on applying this to social good. For example, to improving natural disaster response or health pandemic projections. She is leading a very innovative project, which she'll tell you about today, on monitoring of emissions for transport. Two to my left is Michelle Patron. I pronounced it like it was the tequila, I apologize. She is Director of Sustainability Policy at Microsoft, where she leads policy efforts on sustainability and energy. She has 2 decades of experience forecasting energy markets for private investors and driving high-impact policy. And her career has taken her sort of back and forth between the private and the public sectors. Sometimes we see high-up people do that, indeed. Through the National Security Council at the White House, where she was Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Energy and Climate, and through the private sector, including at a private energy research firm and at Deutsche Bank. I'm trying to say now, almost to the end, sorry, is Ingo Pool. Thanks. With this many people, it's very important to flag who you are. He is Director of Strategy and a co-founder of the South Pole Group. He's a carbon market pioneer who applies policy work on emerging carbon market instruments in practice. He has a very natural pedigree to be such a pioneer. His previous experience was with the World Bank, the IEA, and the design of the EU emissions trading scheme in Germany. His own background is in industrial engineering and international climate policy, which is a very suitable fit if you want to pioneer carbon markets. And then to his right is Jan Willem van de Ven, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. He is the head, he's smiling subtly, so perhaps I did. He is head of climate finance and carbon markets at the EBRD. He develops and manages carbon funds, carbon assets and projects. He's also involved in policy dialogue for the EBRD and manages relationships with their stakeholders and their donors. So that's the panel before you today. I think there's a wide breadth of experience, and yet I have a feeling that, in fact, their wide breadth of experience overlaps in many different ways. So I think I'd like to ask a couple of opening questions and see where we get to. The first is for Igor. And, sorry? That's terrible. That's even my bad. Thank you. I love how the audience is correcting me on this. And anyway, so the first is for Ingo. I love it. You work, and I know that you have a couple of slides which I'll ask to be loaded up. You work at the forefront of technological developments. What are the most promising technological disruptions you see in the climate space to reduce emissions or to build resilience?
Okay, I have some slides. Yeah, thanks for the question. You can see from that picture that I want to take a step back before answering your question. This is New York in 1890, and the projection was that New York and London would be covered in 6 feet of horse shit by the year 1920. There were actually, as of 1892, there were international conferences on the mitigation of the horse manure crisis. These meetings were held, and they never yielded a result because this never happened. Because this happened, innovation happened, right? And this innovation did not happen because of, concerns about the horse shit. They happened because there was a new and a better user experiences facilitated by technology, right? It was a desirability of the technology that drove the change on the back of a better user experience. We see it in other industries as well. We see it in telecommunications. There was basically also a massive innovation providing better solutions. And again, players in the field who completely underestimated the potential of this. So there were companies, I don't know if you remember Nokia, who had very good mobile phones, were very cheap. They saw smartphones. They saw that smartphones were 10 times more expensive. They thought, oh, that's going to be 3% of the market, right? They completely missed the boat. They missed that that such a rich user experience would basically switch society to a better solution, right? Now let's talk about renewable energy. What is the energy user experience? So this is the energy user experience using fossil energy. And then this is the user experience using wind energy, right? So here basically, I think the problem that we are having is when we want to talk about the transformation, what user experience are we talking about? Because it's hard to perceive it, right? When we go to developing countries, the picture changes. Right, so here basically the fossil energy in an unelectrified home is a candle. And the moment we are moving to solar homes and storage, we talk about changing lives of people. Right, so that is actually user experience, right? When we talk e-mobility, right, look at the first electric cars. They were totally not cool. And then what happened? Elon Musk all of a sudden made car insane, right? Insane, the acceleration of a Tesla. Those are pictures of people basically who are experiencing insane mode in a Tesla, right? And all of a sudden, electric cars were on the map. All of a sudden, it was in and it was hip, right? So it can be done. This is electricity, right? So when we talk about the future of this, and now I want to talk about one of the innovations that I have a strong belief in, right? What is ultimately renewable energy? And here's, sounds a little bit religious. Energy sunshine, right, shines for free on the head of everybody in the world, right? And we just need to we just need to put something in between that turns that sunshine that is there for free into value for everyone, for every person, right? We have the technology, right? This is basically historic prices of energy technology just over a longer period of time. And you see how drastic the innovation was, right? That means we now have the solar panels that are very good in converting sunshine into energy at very low cost. We now have the technology, for example, swarm grid technology, that make sun energy very available and make it also very easy to distribute in all kinds of environments, right? To the benefits of the people who are using it, who are trading it with each other, right? We have systems like these pay-as-you-go systems that completely revolutionize solar power in Africa, right? The combination of mobile money and cheap solar panels has created a massive solar boom in a very undeveloped part of the world, right? So this can scale massively, right? We are combining this with, and this is where I'm coming to one of my favorite topics, with blockchain technology, where the transfer and accounting of energy flow and of value and money all of a sudden becomes an autonomous process that runs on a blockchain without human intervention, right? Which I think is key in environments that have low levels of trust, that have low levels of capacity, right? And as a result, we will get to a scalability in the implementation of solar that basically can only be seen in an exponential fashion, right? So if we look at the trends in deployment of solar capacity, if you just look at the growth rate, the yearly growth rates, and we just extrapolate growth rates, which create exponential, basically, curves, right? What we have to realize is that what we have done in the last 10 years, the growth that we have delivered in the last 10 years, if we project that into the next 10 years, we will actually have enough solar capacity to meet the total global primary energy demand of the planet, right? This is exponential. This is totally disruptive. Our brain is wired to think linearly, right? So it's hard to grasp what exponential means, right? But I think I showed you already what exponential means when I showed you the horse slide, right? In 1890, there were 26 million horses in America. In 1920, there were only 3 million horses, right? So basically that it changes overnight. And everybody who is basically not paying attention looks like a horse trader in the old days and finds himself out of business, right? So that is the power of exponential technology and renewable energies that we have, this combination of panels, of blockchain technology, and some other smart devices that are sitting in between, right? So this is one example, right? A great user experience converting money into value for everyone on a very decentral basis. What I want to show you here is another application that I like very much. It's a project that we are also working on, which is also kind of like, it's a big data application. Right now, it's not so much based on blockchain technology, but it's more based on IoT, Internet of Things, and GPS technology to track deforestation and biodiversity. With the application, the one that we have basically developed it for is actually tracking deforestation in supply chains and allowing companies that have long supply chains to make substantiated claims about the contribution of their products to net deforestation, right? Makes it very visual, it makes it very credible in terms of documenting this. That's kind of like my introductory statement. Back to you.
I actually think I have two quick follow-up questions for you, Ingo. The first is, and they actually have to do with your electric vehicle example. Yeah. The first, which is a very minor one, is just whether you think there's actually a tipping point being reached on electric vehicles as well, with recent announcements by big companies such as Volvo, VW, GM, Ford, etc. And also, and my second question sort of stems from that, which is that there seems to be also some regulatory support for electric vehicles. There are sort of, people are considering whether or not China will make an announcement to go all electric, whether some of the Nordic countries have already done so. And so my second broader question is what links you see between policy and technological adoption. And indeed, if you believe there are particular policies that the governments in the other building over there, can use to foster faster adoption to hit this disruption.
Yeah, I want to come back to my horse shit example to answer this question. In the beginning, when automobiles first appeared on the street, it was the crazy ones who were driving it, right? Those who believed they could change the world, famous Steve Jobs quote there, right? But actually, when there was a proof of concept, what happened was that cities started to regulate and actually banned horses from public street, right? So there was a change in what was considered the status quo, and the mainstreaming was completely forced by regulation, right? And I think when it comes to e-mobility and the other topics that you mentioned, I feel about it very similarly, right? There's going to be the crazy innovation in the beginning, which happens free of regulation. I think the role of government here is to promote R&D and innovation, basically to allow creatives, the crazy ones, to play, right? But then once it is clear that there are solutions that work, that are better and then constitute a new status quo, then to regulate and actually, in this case, ban the old and promote the new, right? And that is where the tipping points are. And when it comes to e-mobility, I think you've mentioned it yourself, we already seen some tipping points. I don't know how many countries there are that have banned the sale of combustion engine cars with predictable timelines. Total analogy to the horses, right? And it's kind of like it follows a similar pattern.
Thanks very much. I have to say that I've never ridden in a Tesla on insane mode. I did my first drive in an electric vehicle a couple months back, and I have to say my first reaction was that it felt like the future. But in any case, I think this to be honest, puts a lot of, it sets a high bar for you, Victor, who's our next, to whom I'm going to ask the second question, because it begs the question of whether or not the public sector is in fact behind the private sector in the adoption of technologies. And I think what I'd like to ask is because you work on public-private partnerships that foster innovation, how these in fact benefit the public sector side of the coin. If you could speak to that for a bit.
Sure, maybe.
And I think
yes.
I have a feeling that Ingo will have to pass you the clicker.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. So I'll just give a few words about who the Climate-KIC is so that you understand what inputs I could bring. So we're the largest European public and private community. So we say public-private partnership, but it should not be understood in the financial, in a financial meaning like a PPP. So we are EU's largest community of public and private actors delivering innovation against climate change. So over the last 7 years, we've grown a community of corporates from startups to SMEs up to large global corporate players. On the public and not-for-profit side, we're also working with research centers, academias, all these local authorities, so to really integrate what we call the knowledge triangle. So our mandate given by Europe is really to foster this community to all together develop the solutions that we need to tackle climate change. We've grown several programs over the last year. So I manage one of our flagship programs called the Low Carbon City Lab, which is focusing on unlocking investment for cities. I'll get later on to explain why we focus on cities. But the Low Carbon City Lab really aims to address the funding gap that cities and subnational entities face by delivering training and capacity building. So how can we empower public sector officials in actually implementing, defining and attracting finance for their action? We're looking at project preparation, meaning how do we scale a pipeline of projects at scale and at speed within cities? We're looking at the investment mechanism, so how to channel new and existing capital towards a low carbon and resilient action. And finally, we're also very interested in impact assessment, in MRV. And this is one of the areas where we're currently seeing a very big push, a technological shift when it comes to digitalization. So I'll take the overall subject of this session but focus it on MRV, on monitoring, reporting, and verification. This is one of the many areas that is undergoing a radical change. So on cities are the major source of anthropogenic emissions, so 70%. What is interesting is that if we look at impact assessment and methodologies currently being used, so IPCC frameworks, bottom-up methodologies, the city level is actually the level where the uncertainties are the highest when we use statistical methods. So we have a problem, the major source of anthropogenic emissions is where also the uncertainties in impact assessment are the highest. So if we look at the overall MRV uncertainties from the process and down to the continental scale, we have a bell curve where it's very easy to put a meter, a flow meter in the chimney of a power plant, and it's also very easy to by looking at atmospheric concentrations in high altitude to see exactly how much we're emitting. But when we go at city level, we don't know. We don't know what's happening. And cities are open systems, multi-stakeholders. There are many uncertainties on the emission factors and also on the activity data. Just look at the recent Dieselgate. We have problems. So the Climate-KIC has been working with its public and private community to address. So we've identified a few areas, few projects with our partners where actually we see real breakthrough innovation. So the first one on Citywide real-time monitoring. So we are moving away from this Excel-based culture of counting bins, using reporting protocols. So we are with scientific partners and city authorities, we've developed a citywide atmospheric monitoring solution. So we're putting sensors around, atmospheric sensors around cities. Then by using atmospheric models, running various inversion atmospheric models, we can actually bring real real-time concentration measurement into the bottom-up inventories that are being done, that are being used by cities and reported to various reporting bodies. So here, the role of the public sector, and in this case, it means public, local authorities, where it was critical. We need them, we need their buy-in, we need their political clout to actually use those solutions, you know? So they can be, even though we might think they are not the most the risk takers institutions, they are really essential. They're an essential part of the solution. In this case, it was also very interesting is that given the push we had from Paris, we were able to replicate this solution in Recife in Brazil. So we also had a very nice technology leapfrog, all because of this public body push we had. So, you know, this solution is really very good at breaking uncertainties, bringing real time so that cities and city stakeholders can really act in almost real time or modify their actions. There's another project that I won't go into detail about using mobile phone signal data, and Leonie from Telefónica will be looking at it. We are also adopting a sectorial focus, so on waste, you know, landfills, waste emissions are also a very big source of emissions in cities. We're also talking about short-lived climate pollutants, you know, one of the potential missing bricks, you know, for keeping the 2-degree objective really into our minds. Again, this is municipal waste, this is municipal-owned emissions, and again, the public sector was instrumental in supporting the innovation development. So there's always this challenge of cost and willingness to pay. We have also the articulation between various and numerous accounting reporting systems. There's vertical integration from corporate down to national level, but we always find with serendipity good surprises on, you know, who's going to fund those emission reductions.
Victor, I have 2 follow-up questions for you now, too. The first one is whether or not you have plans to scale up this sort of new technological method of inventorying emissions at city level. As you were speaking, I thought to myself about, for example, the U.S. Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance and the Chinese Alliance of Pioneer Peaking Cities and the Global Covenant of Mayors on Energy and Climate. There are many groups of cities who I think could be very interested in, and that's my first question. My second has to do with your point on vertical integration, and in part because I work in the United States. Do you see an intersection between city government and business that is growing? I know that your project, for even with Telefónica, is at this nexus, and do you see that there will be increased activity at this nexus? I guess I have a slightly U.S. bent in asking this, obviously because of the situation with the federal administration, but those are my 2 questions.
Okay, thank you very much. So on the scaling up, we are just one of the backers of such technology, and WMO is working on it. We have like a very powerful scientific consortium and standardization body at work, you know, to also try to replicate it. We're participating to research programs looking at continental, regional scale of use. So yes, things are moving, but it's real breakthrough technology, and we're currently hitting the wall of, you know, the statu quo. We have generations of solution providers, consultants that, you know, are very happy with, you know, what's already out there with the current methodology. So yes, there's a big scientific push. There are barriers that are, you know, socio-economical. Why should we pay for something better? Is that the real issue? So it's currently moving. China is an area of interest. You know, given its scale, there are also existing. I know there are existing academic interactions being done. So yes, it's hopefully in the 15 years, we'll be able to have a map with real-time emission verification globally. I mean, that's what I would like to see. Then on the interaction between the corporate and municipalities, so I cannot really understand. I can't really see yet the overlap in terms of methodologies or accounting, but I see another one, and we saw that through some of our projects where I think it looks like we're really trying to localize climate action, and we had projects, for example, with the city of Bologna, which is in a big industrial basin in Italy, where there was a real commitment from the big players, the big industrial players in favoring and accelerating climate action locally. So there might be an alignment of corporate and municipalities when it comes to speeding up climate action.
Thanks so much, Victor. You know that if in 10 to 15 years we have a real-time global emissions inventory, you will render the UNFCCC transparency negotiations completely moot. But we'll let those go on for the time being. I'm going to turn across to Leonie, who works on one of the projects that Victor mentioned. Leonie, you use big data to help unlock additional gains in the public sector, and you work at this is the proverbial coalface, although that's a terrible analogy now, of applying mobile phone data to reduce emissions. And so I wanted to ask you to tell us about how that data generates opportunities for climate action. And I know and we'll have to get the clicker over to you too. Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Hi, everyone. So as you just mentioned, we at Telefónica Next, we started to use smart data analytics to contribute to climate action. And how we do this, I'm going to present you now. So first of all, Telefónica Next, what are we doing and what are we? So we are a subsidiary, a corporate startup of Telefónica Germany. Telefónica Germany is the biggest mobile network operator in our country. And to drive the digital transformation forward and to push these topics forward, this corporate startup was founded. So in Telefónica Next, we do everything that has to do with advanced data analytics and the Internet of Things. So in the area where I work in the advanced data analytics, we generate additional value from the data that we have from running our core business as a mobile network operator. That looks weird. So what does it mean? What kind of data do we have? We use anonymized mobile network data. That means we see events in our mobile network, such as everything that smartphones do, like calls or SMS or browsing in the internet. We can see that as events in our network. As a first step, we anonymize this data, so data protection is a very big issue for us. Then we aggregate this data and we extrapolate this data, and what we get from this data panel are motion flows. So we basically have a really good impression of how Germany moves. We can also see what mode of transports are used, and everything is on an anonymized basis, so we have a really valuable big data panel in Germany. Now I'm going to talk about how we use this data panel to contribute to climate action. We do this in Germany in a pilot project, which is called Innovative Monitoring of, actually it's greenhouse gas emissions for transport. The project is one of the Climate-KIC funded projects, and we do it in cooperation with the Southpol Group, which makes this the perfect forum to present this project. Another partner in our consortium is Teralytics, which is a big data analyst specialist. So basically the idea of this project was to calculate or to monitor emissions based on these movement flows that we gain from our data. So since we have a very good idea of how people move in Germany, we want to take the next step and calculate the emissions based from these motion flows. And as you can see on the picture so far, calculating these transport-related emissions in particular, it is a very complex procedure for cities and communities to do so. So they do it using surveys or doing manual traffic counts. And since we have this improved basis, we try to, we actually do provide a better databases in this research project. So how does it work? This is the methodology behind it, just in a nutshell, so it doesn't get too technical right here. So as I just said, the basis for this emission tracking are the motion flows that we see according to our anonymized motion flows from the German mobile network. we see this motion flows in kind of origin-destination analysis. That means we know the start, the end, and the amount of journeys within Germany. And based on these amount of journeys and the kilometers, we can calculate by applying emission factors, we can estimate and calculate the emission factors that are caused by these journeys. We tested this project with the city of Nuremberg in a first pilot, where we compared our results to fixed measurements or to traditional measurement methods, and that just revealed the high potential of this methodology. And this is why we drive this initiative forward. So, summed up, what is the value of this analyzer? So I think it's not a secret or it's not a surprise that emissions and air pollution is a major problem in German cities and in cities all over the world. So what can our data give? How can our data give an additional value to that? So first of all, it's actually the main advantage is that our data is comprehensive, both regarding time and location. So we have this data about motion flows 24 hours a day and every day of the week. So we do not have to count anything manually, but we have this data from our regular mobile network operator activity. And also regarding location, we are not restricted. We see data everywhere where mobile phones are used. So we have a very comprehensive data panel across whole Germany. That is very valuable for cities, because if you take a look at how cities currently measure their air pollution, or in particular the transport-related emissions, there are only fixed point measurements in the bigger cities. And the advantage that we see here is that we have this comprehensive database. So we can help the cities to definitely identify their emission hotspots and their main sources of emissions, and enable them to really attack these emission hotspots. Also, as I just said, there's no installation of hardware or of measurement points necessary, because we have this data and we just need to run the analysis for each city. So summed up, to see how we as Telefónica Next, or how data providers in general, can contribute to taking effective climate action, we believe that we, by delivering this improved databases and by delivering data that is enhanced compared to what cities have so far, we can really help them to first of all address their problems better, and then secondly, of course, take effective actions against them. So make these measures really effective and really really support them in their fight against this air pollution, and give a contribution by providing this good databases.
Cool. Thanks, Leonie. Two quick follow-ups for you too. The first actually is again whether you think what you're doing is in fact can easily be scaled up to other cities. I mean, obviously, and other providers of mobile phone data. And then my second question is, what kinds of city-level interventions have benefited from the speed and the geographical precision that you're offering them? For example, when you piloted in Nuremberg, I'm just curious what kinds of things they came forward with that they thought they could now do that they could not do before, based on your analysis in terms of sort of city-level policy interventions.
All right, so to the first question, we really think that this is a really scalable methodology or scalable analysis. So in Germany, we have the data as Telefónica Germany, but Telefónica is present in Spain and in Latin America, so we have more countries where we as Telefónica have the data. For your second question, in Nuremberg, it was more like a pilot project to really develop this methodology. So we had to see, does it really make sense to calculate emissions from our data? And by comparing our results to the established methods, we saw that there's a huge potential and that we really received good results. For the future, we're also going to, or right now, we're currently at first improving our methodology continuously, and also we're addressing cities, so we try to understand their problems at first. So we conducted surveys, and we are in touch with many German cities to understand what are the challenges and how can we help them to address them. So this pilot project ended now, and we are just driving it more forward to address even more cities and to really help them in the fight against climate change.
Great, thank you so much. We're going to turn now to Jan Willem, who is a user of big data in a different context. And so I want to ask how for you this kind of technology maximizes the impact of your deployed climate finance and also the functioning of carbon markets to reduce transaction costs.
Yeah, thank you. Just to make sure that everyone understands where I come from. I work within the EBRD in the Energy Efficiency and Climate Change Department, and I'm responsible for the climate funds and the carbon market development activities we undertake. The EBRD has invested about 9 billion a year, and we have a green investment target of about 40% of those of our investment volume a year by 2020. Originally, when we set that target a few years ago, we thought that was challenging, but we already kind of close to hitting that target. So that means that we show we can do more and investments in the green space. Just as a number, let's say as to the impact we have. So we work in Eastern Europe, in the Caucasus, Central Asia, Northern Africa, and between 2006 and now we invested about 24 billion in green projects. I myself, I have a lot of experience in the carbon market. I think Ingo and we started about the same time in this area. And we're now looking into a new area where there's discussions here on Article 6, which has market mechanisms, non-market mechanisms, all kinds of mechanisms. And hopefully when the new rules are being decided, that will lead to a new era of using markets, so to say, to sponsor the uptake of green technologies. I think there are lessons from the past. And let's say, so particularly the CDM world, of course, there was a massive market compared to now. But I think there were certain characteristics where I think IT and the further deployment of IT tools can help. And I'm talking about in the CDM world, let's say, there was a lack of speed. It took a long time between the realization of the emission reduction and the payment for it. Yeah, it could last up to 2 years or even longer. And that's not conducive to invite investor sponsors to really make it work. So in fact, we should work towards systems that, let's say, if there's emission reduction, you get a payment. The other thing is that there were questions, of course, on the robustness and the reliability. And then what I always find amazing was the cost to monitor the projects. So let's say transaction cost on that part, so to monitor the emissions were often, let's say, and then I'm also only talking about a third-party validation, which could be somewhere between 5,000 and 35,000 euros, depending on the project type. Now, if you have a project that reduces emissions, but it's maybe not a big number, then these type of costs are prohibitive of using the mechanisms. So I think that are all areas to work on. Now, I just want to draw, let's say, the how the development disruptive the technologies are taking hold. So at home I have a PV system, 3.5 kilowatt system, and I have an app, and I can see real time on SMAPI what my solar production is and compare it against my home usage. So at the moment I'm using in the house 500 watt about, and solar production is about 700 watt. So that's a 200 watt surplus to the society. but it also means that the 500 watt probably means that one of the children is at home sick playing on the PlayStation. So and Xbox at the same time. So I have to make a call after this. No, but it shows the, let's say, the power of information, and I think whilst these tools are available, we should make sure that let's say, negotiators in this space also recognize that these tools are available and that there's an uptake. Now, coming back to where to apply IT tools, and I think we're facing, as we know, a big global warming problem, so inducing climate change, and with all kinds of effects on both the mitigation needs as well as on the adaptation needs. Now, in order to further speed up and further snowball and accelerate and increase size, we need to look at the use of IT tools in the origination of projects. So I'm myself quite involved with some of the climate funds, and if you see the level of information that is required by the stakeholders there to apply for co-funding, it's substantial, and I think IT tools smart tools can help to let's say fill in big chunks and parts of these forms. And I'm thinking about using IT tools in, let's say, big databases to inform more real-time, let's say, standardized baselines for CO2 and per kilowatt hour. So that's one area. So how can we speed up the application process? Another example we have there, and it's an actual example, is in Egypt we have a credit line through the National Bank of Egypt. And in order to speed up the application process, we have there a database with a long list of eligible equipment and materials. So stuff that is predetermined, that is good for the climate. And so you can speed up the loan application process in that respect. So origination of projects, I think, is a key part and perhaps a bit underlooked. Then the MFE part is also very important. So linking up, let's say, already existing metering systems and using big data to increase reliability and robustness of the data. And the last bit, and I think there's probably in some markets already good development, but I think we can do more, is on the actual transaction. So let's say, I don't want to advertise for one payment system over another, but that if you realize the emission reduction, that you get payment in the account sooner than later. So it's about, let's say, this reduction of the settlement cost. These are all areas we're looking into, and there's still a lot of work to be done. For example, we're also looking into, with South Pole, seeing if we can develop some more smart systems for monitoring of so-called modal shift in urban transport. Again, a lot of work to be done, but if we, with the assistance of these IT tools, can buy down the overall transaction cost, then we can increase the climate finance and also avoid that we spend too much money on administrative systems and etc., because they don't really contribute to the emission reductions or the adaptation challenge. Okay, I want to leave it here, but thank you.
And I have a couple of follow-ups for you too, Jan. You mentioned that you are sort of trending. I guess you seem to be. You may meet your 2020 target for green funding early. It seems like you might at this point. I'm just curious what factors have contributed to that to allow you to potentially overperform. And then my My second question is the application of these IT technologies to climate finance, the benefits that you've listed, the increased speed, the increased robustness and reliability, the decreased cost, for example, of validation. Do you see these as incremental benefits, or do you see these as somehow disruptive or exponential benefits? Do you think they're going to unlock, do you know what I mean, suddenly a flow that just, wasn't around before? And curious if you comment on that.
Well, the last question is a bit hard one, because then you then ask me to look into the future, and
that's what we're doing here.
Exactly, and I think there's some theory on that in quantum mechanics, but anyhow, but it doesn't go further than let's say a microsecond as to looking forward. No, I think we all should strive to let's say the climate challenge is enormous. And so we should try and test anything that can help us to speed up. Yeah, that's key. And if then something works, then, for example, I referenced this in order to speed up the loan application process for SMEs with the banks we work with. So before we had always, let's say, consultants coming in and looking at energy efficiency technologies, etc. Now we work more with systems where there's kind of self-declaration on the energy cost, and then there is again a long list of equipment that people can look for, and then we have intelligent systems that look at the deemed emission reductions. And with that, we can reduce the whole application process with 3 months. And I think there are these trade-offs that we need to look into that indeed can help us to speed up.
Great, thank you. With that, I want to turn to Michelle. I think my first question for Michelle has to do with the kinds of opportunities that we see are now being generated, because underpinning those are technological developments that Microsoft is at the heart of. And I'm just wondering what developments you see that are now enabling these new kinds of opportunities.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you, everyone. It is really exciting to be here at COP23. Let me start by saying Microsoft is a cloud and technology company. Our mission is very simple. It's to empower individuals and organizations to achieve their potential. And climate change is an important case for us in that. You've heard a number of solutions talked about today: electric cars or connected cars, monitoring of pollution and emissions, blockchain, and all of those require technology. They require the computing, they require the data analytics, they require the Internet of Things to take that data and put it on your mobile phone. And even in the solar pay-as-you-go, that's a really exciting technology that is a low-level technology that gets connectivity to remote places. And that is why we're so excited about what's happening in technology and how we can apply that to climate change. So what I want to talk about today is 3 things. 1, what Microsoft is doing in its own operations. 2, how Microsoft is putting tools in the hands of our customers and in organizations around the world. And 3, talk about 3 of those exciting projects. So let me start with Microsoft, because for us it really does begin within our 4 walls. Microsoft has a long-standing commitment to climate change and sustainability. Our efforts have evolved over time because the need for action has grown over time, and frankly, the availability of solutions that can scale have grown over time. So we have robust targets and practices. We operate carbon neutral. We have a carbon fee that charges each of our business units for the emissions that they produce. We have ambitious renewable energy targets to get more and more of our energy from renewable energy. And even yesterday, we just announced a new target on energy efficiency to have all of our data centers be LEED Gold certified. So we continue to push our ambition internally, but we know that the problem requires more. And we have to think about going beyond our own 4 walls, which is what we are now increasingly focused on doing. And I have to say, it might be a little controversial to say here at COP23, but we're actually optimistic about what we see. Because we're experiencing, our entire society, our entire world is experiencing a digital transformation. And we think that human ingenuity paired with technology can scale up at the speed and the pace that we need to reduce emissions, to help improve and address actually resource scarcity, and to enhance our resilience to deal with a lot of the growing challenges that we face from climate change. And in just last year, we've seen tremendous advances in cloud technology that allow us to take all of these disparate data points, bring them together, to analyze them, and then to send them back out to operators and to other pieces of technology, and to allow us to optimize our energy use, to allow us to optimize our water use. This same type of process can enable precision farming, so that farmers can in real time adjust and understand to what's both happening because of climate change and other factors, and also increase their yield. And it can also allow us to better predict what's happening to our watersheds, and to enhance our ability to protect against our coastal areas from the impacts of climate change. So this isn't theoretical, it's actually happening right now. And I want to talk about 3 exciting projects to demonstrate this. The first has to do with buildings. And as we know, buildings use a tremendous amount of energy. And we started this project actually in our own home, in our own campus in Redmond, Washington State, in the United States. And it's called 88 acres because our campus is 88 acres. It's probably more the size of some small or medium-sized cities around the world. It has 125 buildings. And so what we did is that we put sensors throughout the buildings to collect lots of different information, if it's what's happening with the lighting, if it's what's happening with traffic pattern, what's happening with meeting patterns, what's happening with the air conditioning and the heating, with doors opening, and then we're collecting that in real time to be able to understand what's happening, and then to figure out ways to optimize our energy use. So it gets that data, it sends a ticket back out either to the unit or to a person to be able to change that performance in real time. And the results speak for itself. We have reduced our energy consumption by 15%, and that has saved us about $9 million a year in our own energy contract. In our own energy purchases just for our campus. So we're deploying that around throughout Microsoft operations, but frankly, we think it's more powerful to go to our customers. And so we're working with customers around the world for them to be able to scale up that solution as well. The second is in the utility space. And we heard a bit about reference throughout about what's happening with solar panels and the ability to track in real time and what's happening with electric vehicles. A lot of that is putting stress on the grid, and it requires a grid to be able to adapt in real time, to be able to put those assets onto the grid and balance it in ways where they don't need to put more substations on, and they can increase the uptake and integration of these resources. So we are working with one of our partners, Energy, which is a utility in Norway, on an autonomous grid, where they, on top of the existing infrastructure, can put software in place to understand what's happening with demand, both by the sensors they have, but also predictive analytics. And then they, on the other side, can understand what assets they have to dispatch in real time. Do they have a solar panel? Is there a battery that's plugged in? And that they can better balance their energy use. They reduce the need to put more substations, which can cost billions of dollars. And they also are able to increase the integration of both renewables and electric vehicles. In a place like Norway, that's pretty important when I think about 30% of the transport fleet is electric. The third example is FarmBeats, and this is a really, really exciting example, and this just shows you how it's not just in the energy space, but there are applications here in the agricultural space as well. And so this is taking sensors in a farm and being able to collect information so that the farmer knows exactly what's happening with the soil, exactly what's happening with the water moisture, exactly what's happening with the weather and what's happening with the yield. And so that they can better adjust where they put their resources, how much they put into the ground, when they decide to both plant and harvest and increase their yield. The exciting technology here is both the cloud and the predictive analytics, but it's also a technology called TV white spaces. And that's the ability to get to more remote areas of the world that have lower connectivity. They're using an unused television channel to be able to connect but get broadband strength access so that you can connect at the edge, if it's a farm, if it's a boat, if it's a forest, and be able to do the same types of things that you can do in a data center to be able to do that there. And so we're really excited about the potential both for what this means for agriculture, for a lot of other sectors. So as you can see, there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on at Microsoft, both within our four walls and more importantly, within our partners and customers around the world.
Thanks very much, Michelle. I think I want to open the discussion up to everybody. I want Michelle to take the lead on the first sort of overarching question. I really want to invite the speakers here to literally jump in with your microphones and add if you like. My first question, I want to ask a couple of really general thematic questions. They're all going to be slightly provocative. The first one resonates with me because we have at BSR a futures director, and he enjoys showing a graph where the vertical axis is global installed renewable energy capacity, and the horizontal axis is time. And what this graph shows is that every single time that the German government, the IEA, or Greenpeace have made a prediction as to the future of global installed renewable energy capacity, that they have always and repeatedly underestimated it. And so I think my first question has to do with this notion of disruptive change and the potential underestimation of this change. And I guess the question, put bluntly, is when we get to the end of the first NDCs in, say, 2030, are we going to look back from 2030 and wonder how we so badly underestimated our ability to mitigate and to adapt to climate change at that time? And if you believe that that is the case, I think I have a feeling from Ingo's presentation that he does believe this is the case, perhaps. But if you do believe that is the case, why do you think that is the case? So that's my first question. Did you want to start, Michelle? And maybe I'll bounce to Ingo.
Look, I think that the changes in general that we ever see, the technological changes that we see and the structural changes that we see are never linear, right? They always tend to be much more exponential. And both of that is because there's a pile-on effect, but then it's just that the scale of technology just never goes small. Once it cracks big. And so I think that that is part of what's going on here. And I think that, I touched on some of the things we've seen. It's just that the scale, none of us thought we would get the reductions in energy in a year that we saw from just across our campus. And then technology continues to evolve, and you don't need to just do it on 125 buildings that are next to each other now. You could actually have a visualization of your entire geographical footprint around the world to be able to optimize. So I think that is part of what could help uncrack or unlock bigger and faster results.
Yeah, it's linear and exponential. I already spoke about that. But there's still a sense of urgency because while it's bound to happen, we know there is still resistance to the change, right? And I think we also know that every ton in the atmosphere counts at this point because it's an accumulation problem, right? And while the long-term result is clear, right, there are still short-term battles to be fought and people to be convinced, right? And I think that an instrument like the TCFD, this Task Force on Financial Disclosure, basically looking at the financial risk of not responding to the risk, right, is very useful, timely, and needed in order to make clear to those who are not yet kind of like convinced that we have to do this and that we have to do this quickly, right? To actually, basically use very financial arguments to show, no, it's time that you face it. Because if you're not, basically you are, again, kind of like the horse trade, based kind of company that will not exist in the future, which is not good for them, right? So long-term outlook is clear, but there are still battles to be fought. We cannot say we won.
One thing, from the corporate perspective, folks, what's been a huge change in the last few years has been what's happening in the corporate sector and the role, the clean energy, the renewable energy targets, and the carbon targets that the companies are taking. And just to understand the scale of that, 71% of Fortune 100 companies now have renewable energy and climate goals. And I think half of all Fortune 500 companies do. And that was not the case even 5 years ago. So I think that also the penetration of action way beyond being dictated by policy has now really entered these other spheres that really tend to be the drivers for innovation and greater action.
Fantastic. Yep. If you have more to add, please do.
And I mean, the effort is great, but I just want to, because it's we just finished a project actually in Southeast Asia, and looking at energy trends there, right? And the future in Southeast Asia is still coal. Right, there is this great corporate action, and there are the leaders, like Microsoft, doing a lot, right? But we see, but we still see like very big fights, right? And like in our report, we say if only half of that pipeline gets built, we'll not be able to reach the 2% target, right? So there are pockets, what means pockets? There are large areas where the right things is happening, but there are also like very substantial areas where it's not happening, right? And it's Southeast Asia, but we also got feedback, and the same is happening in Central Asia, right? And if basically, I mean, we'll publish that thing soon, but like for me, I'm still in urgency mode, right? While I'm also hopeful, yeah.
Yes, I mean, just to add, I mean, I remember a study from the Stockholm Environment Institute that was published in 2015, talking about the carbon lock-in effect. And in 2015, they were saying that the next 5 years were critical when it comes to investment in urban infrastructure, because those decisions would really determine 1/3 of the carbon budget we have under a 2-degree scenario. So it was 2 years ago. It means I'd like to know how fast we've moved, and how we've been positioned over the last 2 years. So I mean, at Climate-KIC, we're really like technology enthusiastic. We think it can be hacked, but I mean, can we hack demographics? Can we hack urbanization? Can we hack the investment decisions that have to be made in the next 3 years? I think it has to be demonstrated. So yes, I hope that that technologies can have an exponential effect on climate and emissions, because the environment, the ecosystem's response to our actions is not linear as well. So yes, I do hope.
All right, I'll move on to my second slightly provocative question. I used to be a UNFCCC negotiator, and this is where this question comes from. So when I look at the main parts of the Paris Rulebook that are to be concluded at COP24, I think of markets, rules on markets, on transparency, on accounting of emissions, on information provided by countries. Several times during this conversation, it seems to me that these things, which will be completed by hard work within a year, might actually be rendered obsolete by these technologies. And so I guess my question is, the slightly provocative question is, do you think that these new technologies will in fact render, if you will, this other way of doing things obsolete? And do you believe that a radical kind of transparency is coming our way? And I'm happy to take anyone's thoughts on that. I mean, I can assign, but I prefer not to.
Let's say, I think we still need rules. Let's say, particularly in finance, we are rule-based, or let's say society in that sense. So our money will not be dispersed until we see certain things happen as per a contract. So I think it's very important also on the UNFCCC level to put that guidance in as to how that looks like. And I don't think the disruptive technologies will advise anything on, let's say, the attribution of the accounting. So I think that, no, we definitely need solid rules.
We think these technologies make humans and individuals better at what they do. And so I think you will have better data. You will have more real-time data. You'll have much lower costs at getting that data, and it will be democratized across the world. But you still need you still need the process, and you definitely still need the negotiators.
All right.
Yep.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So yeah, I think so. I completely agree with Michel, and I don't think it's making that obsolete. I think it can actually make this whole process to be much more inclusive, because we can get data from other sources. It means from other sources of emissions, or we can get data on people affected, more data on more people, more typologies of actors affected by climate change. So I think it's a very, very positive trend, and in this, those current negotiations are still held at national level, but I think on the subnational level it can be a very powerful vehicle to give subnationals a spot. It's also a very good opportunity for the corporate sector to also be held either accountable or for its good or bad decisions, as well as down to citizens themselves, if we can get this data at the citizen level.
And just to add what has not yet been said, is a policy process is not basically the really disruptive, is not creating the disruptive leadership. Like as I said before, I think what we are doing on technology is showing the way. And I think when we show results, it increases the courage of regulators to then go all in. Like to make stronger. Like again, coming back to the horses. First, the first car drivers kind of like were the weird ones, right? But then when it was clear that this was actually the way of the future, then the regulators came, and then let's now make it binding. Now we actually take the horses off the road. We make a regulation about this is the behavior that we won't tolerate, and that's when like in any in any S curve, right? In terms of like dissemination of a technology, you start with the pioneers, the early adopters, then comes the regulation, and then it becomes mainstream, right? Like you need the regulators for those who don't care, who are kind of like passive on the topics, right? And that's where the effectiveness is, and that's where it's needed.
To add there, I think I totally agree that there's just some time needed to change the minds of regulators and of involved, like the public sector, as we see it in our research project. We have like an approach, an innovative and new technology, but it will take some time to change the people's minds and to convince them of this technology. So it's not a change that's going to come from day to day, but I think it's going to be a process in which also the regulators are going to adapt these innovations and see the use of these new technologies.
This is great. Before we open it up for audience questions, I want to ask one last question, and I'd like each panelist to give an answer. And the question is simply, what messages you would wish to convey to those governments that are now negotiating over in the Bula zone? You can take this from either angle, in the sense of a message that you believe, a method in which you believe you enable them to strive for additional ambition, or indeed a policy that you would like from them, something, for example, in their next round of NDCs, or even something that they can use domestically to implement their current round of NDCs. So, but just what you would send from this room across to the rooms a bike ride away. Sorry, we'll go down the line for this one.
Okay, so I guess I would have many things to tell them, but if we contextualize the question in this session and the adoption of innovative technologies, I think there's a lot of willingness from governments, subnationals to adopt new technologies, but very often they're operating in a very regulated environment that is not always favorable to the adoption of innovation. So whether it's we're talking about even down to procurement or standards or regulations, up to like risk aversion. So yes, I think they should really consider creating enabling frameworks in their various jurisdictions for trial and error on those potential climate solutions. That's less like it.
For us, it's very simple. It's that, technology is probably the only thing that can scale up at the pace and the time needed to address the challenges that are in front of us.
Well, as you saw from the recent UNEP report, we're now heading for a 3.5 degrees world, apparently. So I think the message is set the bar higher as to emission reductions. And I think also we have seen in the past from the carbon market that the targets that were set were realized at lower cost than anyone anticipated. So I think rather than trying to reduce supply and make it more difficult, I think there should be a more active process as to increasing targets. And I think IT can help to speed up the process at which inventories come to play, because now there's a time lag of about 3-4 years on that of the type of data.
This is COP23, right? And maybe I don't look it, but COP1 was the first COP that I went to. Right? So I went to COP1, and here is COP23. And there's one a year, right? My daughter has been born in between. She's now at college, right? She's an adult, right? And we're still sitting here, right? So, and I know there are many in the teams, in the negotiation teams, that I've seen also for a long time. And if you do something for too long, right, you lose a bit kind of like perspective. And so that's where my message is, right? When we started, the world was very different in COP1, right? Kyoto was a burden-sharing agreement because there was a burden to share, because the cost of the transformation back then was high, right? A burden-sharing agreement. Who is picking up the bill, right? And so my message to those people is, we are not living in a burden-sharing world anymore. Paris is designed as an opportunity-sharing agreement, right? And you, as a policymaker, right, look at what we are doing here as an opportunity-sharing process, right? And if you fail to see this as an opportunity, you will get left behind, right? This topic is not climate change, the topic is industrial competitiveness, right? If you're not doing this, right, you will have high energy cost, you will have a non-competitive structure in your economy, right? It will affect the livelihoods of your people if you fail to see this as an opportunity-sharing agreement, period.
All right, so as we already said, we all are pretty sure that those technologies and innovations are going to be the solution for the future. But I think what my message would be now is that it needs some brave decisions to start to adapt these technologies now. So just as Victor said, try and error, just be brave and start to trust in new innovations and digitization to help the fight against climate change.
All right, thank you very much. We have about, 13 minutes left, technically. I just, there will be a microphone going around. If you could just raise your hand if you have a question, and please do state who you are and which institution you're affiliated with. All right, so I'll take the gentleman over there and then the woman in the front row. So first the gentleman over there. Sorry, yep, just around. Thank you. I know. Yeah, just in the front row.
All right, sorry.
Apologies, yeah, and you may need to keep your hands up after.
Hi, thank you all for your contributions. Tom Popple from Natural Capital Partners. My question is to build on Ingo's concept around the private sector pioneers acting first, regulation second, mass uptake, and then probably a second generation of innovation. So it seems to me that the private sector are the pioneers. So is the private sector doing enough? And if they're not, what's stopping them? Is it the governments on the public side not being supportive, or the private sector waiting for something? And that's really to everybody, but picking up on Ingo's point.
Who wants to tackle that one? Do you want to go first? Yeah.
Is the private sector doing enough, right? I mean, there's always inertia, and everybody has inertia, right? But I think we are now, there's something that I feel has changed a little bit, which is like this, it's okay to fail, right? We used to have also in corporate culture, you try something, you fail, you get punished, right? I think for some reason that attitude has changed. So the realization that we live in an age of hyper-innovation, I think, has now arrived broadly, right? So I think, and so there is startup scenes everywhere, there are incubators, accelerators, that's also basically around clean tech, right? So I think the private sector has really learned to not make that mistake of being stuck in the status quo. But I would say there are also like pockets that remain in that old sad culture of where it's like not okay to fail, right? And I think, so it's moving in the right direction in terms of what we are doing, but I would say there's still this old problem of kind of like inertia. But, you know, as I said, I see the culture changing, right, in the right direction, right? Yeah. So I wouldn't blame the private sector for not doing enough.
Anyone else? No? All right. I think the woman in front also had a question, and then I'll look for someone over on this side.
Thank you very much. Very interesting discussion. My name is Marella Orlovik. I'm part of the Seychelles support team, and I'm also a digital and sustainable entrepreneur. The question that I would like to ask to any of you is talking about leadership and talking about digital. There is a big part that has not been mentioned, which is the software. Talking about, you know, we are all having our iPhones here. They are produced in a not very ethical way. They have chemical ingredients. They have toxic ingredients inside. They are not being recycled. Every time we do a tweet, it gets saved 5 times, which is resulting in strong CO2 emissions. So who's taking the leadership on pushing the social media giants and also the hardware giants, not talking about Microsoft in this case, but let's name them Apple, who's pushing them to contribute from their parts to have a sustainable business and supply chain? I'm not seeing this at all, and this is really worrying me, even though I do see all the good benefits that digital in general is doing. So who's taking care of the harm that digital is creating?
All right. Does someone want to speak sort of to the theme, the question of costs of this digital transformation, how they're being tackled?
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And you definitely raised some very, very important points. So thank you for bringing it up. Look, we are very mindful at Microsoft that as our our data center footprint and our supply chain increases around the world, that we are becoming a growing consumer of resources, if it's energy, if it's water, if it's land, if it's waste. And so that's why, in a lot of part, that's been one of the main drivers, because we see this as both a responsibility and an opportunity, frankly, to do more and to innovate in this space. And so that's more from the data center perspective. We have taken on these bold renewable energy commitments, and when we buy renewable energy, we're just not focused on buying the electrons. We're focused on catalyzing so much more change. And so we're innovating how we purchase energy so that it's cheaper and more affordable and accessible for others to purchase as well. And we're also innovating in the technology space. And so, in fact, a month ago in Ireland, we just did a deal that included the first integrated battery storage in all of Europe. So that we're developing storage technologies, we're developing fuel cells technologies so that we can really catalyze greater change. We're trying to minimize our water footprint. We're trying to minimize our land footprint. And then we're trying to figure out how we can do a better job of the reuse and recycle. And so it's a responsibility that we see. We engage with our local communities. We hear a lot from NGOs, and I think that drives us to do more, and it puts a spotlight on it, which is important also to the conversation to get us to do more.
And just to, I love the question, and to put a bit more oil on the fire here, like I mentioned in my presentation, we love the idea of blockchain technology, Internet of Value, to accelerate investment into the transformation, right? But we also basically, before we kind of make a big decision in terms of how we want to work with that technology, we actually have a project, it's called Clean Coin, right? It's to carbon footprint the different blockchain technologies to say, though, what is the sustainability of the technology itself, right? And I must say I was totally shocked by the finding, right? So basically your baseline is transaction on Visa card or cash, right? which is associated with about 0.3 grams of CO2 per transaction, right? And you compare that to a Bitcoin transaction, which has actually 60,000 grams of CO2 in a transaction, or an Ethereum transaction, which still has 10,000 grams of CO2 in a transaction. So this tells me it totally matters how we approach this, right? And that we have to make like super informed decisions around this before we say, you know, like this makes sense or not. We really kind of like have to, like what you said, like really look big first, and then so that we really know what we're doing before we start doing, right?
Can I just make a comment? When obviously not all clouds and not all computation is the same. I mean, what we have found when you move from an on-premise facility to the Microsoft Cloud and to other hyperscale public clouds, there is a gain that is higher than 90%. When it comes to energy efficiency. And then if you actually layer on top of it what happens, where they get the energy from, if you are getting energy from carbon-free sources, it also is drastically reduces. So that's one data point. It's a really important data point, but is not necessarily indicative of what the carbon footprint and the energy footprint of cloud.
So for EBD, what we call resource efficiency is a very important aspect as well, and we work a lot with industry. So your iPhone for a large part is made out of glass, and now I don't know whether our client Sisicam from Turkey is supplying any of these phone manufacturers, but what we have done in Turkey with Sisicam is to work with them on the Turkish legislation on the recycling of glass, and also making sure that let's say that there's a bigger recycling of glass and etc. And we not only looking at glass, we're looking at metals, we're looking at all kinds of other, let's say, resources that go into manufacturing processes. And I think that's a responsibility more with the industrial manufacturers than it is with the kind of the IT suppliers. Although through green procurement they can change it a little bit. Yeah.
And in addition, I think it's a very important point that you raised that from all the data analytics, also as Telefónica does it, it raises a responsibility and obligation to care for the whole supply chain and to kind of also address the impact that this data analysis has. So I can just speak for Telefónica that we also like follow sustainable business plans and try to reduce energy, reduce our waste and so on. So I think it's an important issue that has to be raised also for the big players like Apple and so on. So I think it's an important point that you make here.
All right. Okay. All right. The microphone's already landed at the next question. Sorry, I'm still going to look in this direction after this, please.
David Unger, Aqua Power. I felt very good about this presentation until last year when I was living in New York and working in Arlington. But now I am responsible for the greenhouse gas mitigation and sustainability of a very large power company in the Middle East, Africa. And I think the conversation addressed maybe 1.2 billion people on the planet. EU is about 7% of the world's population, North America, and so on. But then there is a tremendous disconnect because the rest of the 6 billion has very different issues. And Ingo was the one who raised it that still coal is going to be the base load solutions in many countries. Even the Middle East is building several coal power plants. And how this transformation, in your view, could be spread to the rest of the world, because it is not spreading in the rate that is essential. I just came back from the northern Cape of South Africa where we're building renewables, or in the Kalahari Mountains in Morocco, or I go down anywhere in Asia, and a lot of these technologies that you're mentioning are not the one which are going to disrupt or creating the change. I rather would like to see, or wondering when we can have desalinization without fossil fuel, which I think is very far, and a lot of other issues. Because the smartphones is not really the issue in these areas, and you have a very large segment of the population on the planet lives with that. So the digitalization is not there yet, but the carbon footprint is growing.
So comments on the global spread of these technologies.
It's a hard game indeed, but let's say from our side we try to push it as hard as we can. And so if you talk about renewable energy, we're supporting governments in implementing renewable energy legislation in Egypt, Morocco, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, etc., to Turkey. So it's let's say our advantage is we can work both on the policy side as well as on the investment side. So we can immediately put money if good regulations take hold in these countries. And I think that's an important trailblazer, so to say, in these countries. And then once there's a kind of minimal mass available of this type of technologies, then we work a lot with the private sector in order to kind of scale it up, etc. So, but it's not an easy game. Sometimes, let's say we book successes and then we are being pulled back by, let's say, the vested interest in these countries. But and then we have to go it again. Yeah. Cheers.
It's a very important challenge, and for us, we try and see what we can do within our own operations and within our own technologies and with our customers. And so, for our renewable energy goals, those are global, right? And so we are going to try and we're doing those deals wherever we have a presence, and that's where trying to work to get different types of renewable purchasing contracts and contractual structures where others can be able to do that in the future is an important principle for us, as well as the technologies, if it's storage and fuel cells, so that can be brought to bear there. And the second piece, as I mentioned, is this, is this lower frequency TV white spaces. So it's the unused TV channels, and we have a few of those projects already in operation in India. So one of the farm beats, the agricultural project I mentioned, we have that underway in India, and then throughout Africa, we have a number of projects in which we are coupling that connectivity, broadband technology with solar panels and the pay-as-you-go to be able to help that. Is it at the scale of a massive, combined cycle or other plant? Not there yet, but at least we're trying to figure out how the tools can be deployed throughout the world.
All right. All right. This will be the final comment, and I apologize. I didn't get to turn to this side of the room for questions, so I'm inviting you up to swarm the speakers afterwards. But please go ahead.
But I mean, what you say. So South Pole. The reason why we are called South Pole, besides the fact that we love penguins, is because we always were around collaboration between the North and the South using the market mechanisms, right? And we had the CDM and we had the voluntary carbon market. And we saw the transfer of financial resources and capacity to accelerate that, like that sharing of knowledge. Now we have Article 6. We don't have, because it's not yet there, right? But it's there where, also a little bit the future hopefully is. Now, let's bring back collaboration to accelerate the penetration of these technologies in the countries that don't have it.
All right, some really good questions from our audience. So first, thank you all for coming. Please do give our climate change hackers a warm round of applause, and feel free to approach them. All right, cheers.